Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tomorrow's Trends. Today, I'm here as Ira Sharp talking to Brandon, and we're going to talk about something that I know is a hot topic in the industry of IT/OT convergence. Can't wait to get involved in this conversation. I've known Brandon for quite some time. I've been on another podcast with him before and have had some other conversations with him. Brandon, welcome to the show. Can you give us a little idea of who you are and what you've been up to?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Brandon Artz. I've been in the industry for about a decade, graduated from Indiana State University, non-traditional student, didn't go to college right away, kind of bounced around service and retail industry. Eventually went back to college, got my undergrad in electrical engineering technology, got my graduate degree in information technology with a focus in industrial cybersecurity. Came out of industry, went into automotive. From Indiana, automotive is king in the Midwest. Worked for a Japanese firm that did headlights. Most Toyotas, Subarus, Hondas that are on the road are using headlights from North American Lighting. That was my first job. I was a process engineer focused on data collection, IoT, but for process engineering use cases. How good are our molds? How good is our assembly process? Things like that. Moved from there into CPG, into Stanley Black & Decker. Got into, again, more molding, but also a lot more metalworking, skiving, tempering, annealing, things like that. Did a lot of data collection, I4O, IT/OT convergence, things like that. Worked for the operations division within Stanley, really tailored to, getting out data for an operational focus. So, what's our OEE, what's our TEEP? A lot of legacy machinery at Stanley, so there was a lot of opportunity to do more sensorization and integration. It was a lot less, PLC driven integration. So there's a lot more thinking out of the box, a lot more using what you would consider to be IoT devices. Eventually moved away from Stanley. I went to Symbotic, which is an automated warehouse company. Really focused on IT/OT convergence there. How does the controls team interface with systems engineering for VMs, port assignments, ARP domains, DNS, things like that. And also looking at how we do our networking topology, network standards, things like that. And then how do we deploy this? How do we document our network site to site? How do we configure devices? How do we make this a streamlined process? Eventually left Symbotic, ended up at Walmart, which is one of Symbotic's largest customers. Here, I'm very much focused more on UI, UX, HMI, SCADA, that layer. I'm also doing a fair amount around, connectivity, data collection, and things like that, since that seems to be my wheelhouse in industry. And that's kind of where I find myself now.
It's so great to hear the background and the bio there, Brandon, because, so often, we talk to a lot of people that are involved in different places of Industry 4.0 and IoT and this data topic and all these things. But there's a lot of theory and a lot of these kind of things are going around. But you have real on-hands experience of working on this with a number of different types of applications and different types of companies and different types of market approaches and all these different kinds of things. So it's so great to kind of have you on and to dive into some of this depth here. With your experience, can you I know you can't divulge the company secrets and everything else, but maybe take us down a little deeper and kind of like what you're doing in Walmart and what you're allowed to share and how all that all connects with the IT/OT topic and whatnot.
Walmart has a bunch of different robotics groups. The team I work for specifically is more focused on their stores. Public facing, there's a lot of information about Walmart's goal to bring automation into the store. When you go into a Walmart or even a competitor, a Target, Kroger, all these various grocers, you see people walking the floor, picking orders, assembling, the to-go order for the various online purchasing. Everyone, I think, COVID really broke us out of the kind of skepticism or maybe the hesitancy to do that kind of ordering. But nowadays, I think it's become commonplace. I personally use it. I don't know too many people who don't. And so really the industry needs to move that way. And that's what Walmart's exploring is how do we bring automation into the storefront so that we can assemble orders rapidly and really bring the time it takes from when you hit payment option to the time when you can pick it up. How can we bring that down? how can we make your experience better as the consumer? And so that's really what our group is focused on, is that level of robotics at a storefront level.
That's really cool. It's super interesting as well. Is yes, I'm also one of the people that uses that functionality, particularly when it comes to like grocery shopping and whatnot, because God knows I'll go in hungry and walk out with way too much stuff. So having it pre-ordered and then have it delivered to my car or whatever else is maybe better for me. But to your point, like it is interesting how manual of an operation that is. And look, if you extrapolate that to manufacturing and all these other areas, there's a lot of manual interaction. And if you can get more data and information about the system and process that you're trying to approach, I'm sure that can really help you work to improve things. So it's definitely a good thing to consider and to go about. Now, with that, I'm assuming there's a very tight tie between the information system and the data that's there, as well as the OT and how you can do things, whether it be here or just in general. And I know it's an area that you've spent a lot of time. Can you maybe share some of your experience, whether it be related to Walmart or to any of the companies or any of your experiences that you've worked with, and kind of what that IT OT convergence looks like?
Again, a lot of what I've done is really data oriented, working for various stakeholders, to understand what are your needs, but also enable other departments. So I think a lot of times these projects kick off and people have their focus in mind. So they're really looking at, what data do I need to make the decisions I need? But really, they should approach it with more of a general mindset that says, I'm coming in to do this project. If I can lay the infrastructure right, then I can enable many other departments to get the information they need with just the one system that we built, and quit doing so many, point solutions. I can't tell you how many times I've seen these point solutions try to scale and it doesn't quite meet all the needs. So now we have this other point solution that sits beside it, and this one does these items and this one does this. It's not really the approach that works. I think we can all agree the approach is, I hear some people call it the unified namespace. I hear some people call it just I4O in general. But really, it's making all of that data available, because at the end of the day, as weird as it sounds, the data is almost worth more than the product that you're handling. And I know that's a hard concept. Even I was skeptical in the beginning when I first moved into this, where, how could the data be more valuable than the product that I'm actually monetizing now? But it's the downstream cost avoidance and the downstream process refinement. Like you said, it's a very manual process. In an automotive, we'll spend weeks to figure out how to shave 1 second off of a cycle time, because it has value at scale. And online shopping is a massive scale. And so if you can shave off 5 seconds, 10 seconds, that's got quantifiable value to it.
So much of what you're saying is, it's truly what I believe, and it's what I've talked about and write about and things. But when you really look at it, this data piece, the way that you put it as well, I think is so great. I look at these CEO reports. IoT Analytics puts out a great report every quarter and looks at the key buzzwords that are happening, things that are in all the market, or all their marketing reports and all their quarterly reports. And you always see the trend topics, like whether there's like a recession or elections coming up, or government affairs, but then also things like IoT, Industry 4.0, big data. That was a topic. Now a lot of that shifted then to like sustainability topics, and now it's all about like the buzz topics of generative AI and LLMs and all these topics. And all those topics, all of them, they're all wonderful. They're all great. Unfortunately, I think the thing that a lot of companies fail to realize is, without that data, it's really hard to implement a lot of those strategies. And it truly is, like you mentioned, in a lot of cases, more value, or at least could be more valuable than the products themselves. And I agree with you. It is very hard to kind of put that in mind, because of course the P&L is based on the profits and loss of really your revenue and what your profitability is there. But if you can use data to shave time off your operations, well, then your operational costs and go down. Your consumer effectiveness goes up. You have better retainment of your customer base. There is a reason that certain people shop at certain locations, and a lot of it has to do with convenience, availability, and these kinds of things. So I think it plays directly in it. It's on point. I love it.
And there's really been two things that I noticed when I first came into industry that people just don't want to do: documentation and infrastructure. To your point, those buzzwords, they don't include things like knowledge base or SCADA controls. They don't include that foundational bottom layer. And one of the things I realized in industry is there's a lot of people out here trying to paint houses before the foundation's even laid. And I'd like to be the one to go lay that foundation so that it's done right, because it seems to be a void in the industry. And so really, I've tried to focus ever since going back to college on what is the weakness in industry and where can I market myself the most. And again, documentation and infrastructure seem to be a weakness. And so that's really where I've kind of forced my career to go. I'm not saying I like documentation more than other people. It is dry at times, but it's necessary, and it's a great way to have that job stability, because we can't get to generative AI or any of these other topics without a well-documented, stable, data-driven environment underneath everything.
And I think this is one of the reasons we get along so well, Brandon. Every time we talk, I know it's been few and far between, but we've had a number of conversations, and I just believe we're very much in this same mind space. Because I agree. Like nobody wants to write the documentation. Like that's not fun. But seeing the causality, seeing the output, seeing what it can result in, it's so powerful. Now, when we're talking about like this convergence, so you have the OT side, and there's clearly this is where the magic happens. This is where things are being produced. This is maybe in the it's where there's material that is changing place. The IT side is really the moving around of data. It's connecting of computers. It's POS systems. It's whatever it is on the manufacturing floor. It's that infrastructure. The needs and responsibilities of these organizations, I think, are sometimes not completely aligned, and that can cause challenges. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to share there. I know cybersecurity in particular is one of the topics that can. It is also one of these big topics, but whether it be just the needs and priorities of the organizations or the cybersecurity elements of them, I don't know. Maybe you have a few things to share there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There's a huge gap there. You have two very different parties that are operating very different from each other, but they both have valid concerns and valid constraints. And again, that's another gap in the industry. And I honestly have leveraged my time as a bartender previous to college. The interpersonal skills that you learn in a moment when people are arguing and intoxicated, if you can talk those two people down, you can get IT and OT to see eye to eye and come to a common ground. And having the background of, controls engineer by trade, but technically cybersecurity by discipline, by degree, that's really helped me understand the IT concerns and help mitigate them, and help OT understand the constraints that IT has and adapt to them. Help them understand we don't control the firewall. We're at their mercy. But, they gave us these ports, these IPs, these inbound connection, these outbound. But to understand all of that and understand what you need to request from your IT organization, it does take some understanding of networking and of cybersecurity. So again, leveraging those two together, interpersonal skills from bartending and college cybersecurity together has helped me really drive these projects to a conclusion, because I don't really get held up by your traditional failure points of, well, we can't get this through a security audit. Well, why? I have questions. I understand your concerns, so let's talk through them. And to your point, yeah, it's a huge gap, but it's one that needs filled, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. So that, again, the job security looks good, and so that's really why I have pushed myself into this, and I've really tried to push the students that I used to interact with towards this discipline. It's a great place to be, and I really don't see that changing in my career. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe towards the tail end of my career, this is less of a concern and everyone's updated. But you and I both know there's machinery out there running from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. OT, if it's not broke, they're not going to replace it. So, that's going to be something that causes this to be a pain point for some time.
Yeah, and so first of all, I just got to say, I believe this is the first time that I've had OT conversations quite a bit, but heard it related to a bartender and a drunken dispute in a bar. That's like just it's a perfect visual of the way some of these conversations can go. And you're right, being that intermediary to kind of like pull those two parties maybe down a notch and recognize that yes, there are differences, but there are reasons for these differences. And then it's really a matter about how can we move forward together, because we do have to work within the constraints of both. So maybe OT needs to work more with them to have security come down more onto the floor, or have documentation or networking, or connect more systems because of the whole data topic. But on the other side, we have to make sure that things continue to run and are able to run. And we can't always be shutting down operations to update Windows 11 because it's sitting on the factory floor, because that's just not the way things can operate on the factory floor. So there's a lot of nuances there. So with your experience there, or maybe just in general, what do you see as, because it sounds like you've had this conversation, as the biggest challenges or biggest takeaways between that convergence layer, or maybe just helping proctor these conversations? Because it sounds like you've had some interactions with students as well. What are some of the coachings you may have?
It's breaking out of what you're comfortable with. And that's really it. Is a lot of times you don't have people that want to find a common ground because they don't know how to find that common ground. They don't realize what they can control and what they can change about what they've designed so that they can adhere to the infrastructure requirements. Most of my career has been working for two larger companies, Stanley Black and Decker and now Walmart. There are enterprise IT policies that you just cannot change. These are set at the highest level and they're brought down, and rightfully so. I mean, these are policies that were identified at the top level as necessary to maintain, either network segmentation, segregation, whatever the reasoning behind it. It's getting people, and most of the time, it's on the OT layer. Honestly, is getting them to understand these are the constraints, and we've got to find a way to work through that by challenging it with alternative solutions. So to your point, we have these constraints. Let's say we need to collect data quickly, but the firewall is undersized. So we're seeing packet drops at the firewall. Well, let's look at how we can bring that data collection down a level to the OT so that we're not traversing the firewall. And then let's convert that protocol to something that's more latency tolerant. It's one thing to communicate Ethernet IP or Profinet to a PLC to grab data. Well, if the packet drops, you lost that moment. It doesn't buffer. OPC UA, any of these protocols, they're a real-time protocol. But if you can get that data into a pub sub architecture, like a RabbitMQ or MQTT or something like that, you build in almost like an accumulator valve in a pneumatic system, that shock absorber that sits there and buffers that data and gives you your best chance at success. And so that's the kind of thought process that you have to have, is how do I adapt? Because you've got to realize, in a large organization, kind of like during COVID, there was that ship in the Suez Canal that tried to turn and it got stuck. That's the organization that you work for. A lot of times it's a very large ship in a very narrow canal, and you'll be lucky if it turns without running ashore. So you need to realize you're on the boat, you bought the ticket, you've got to ride the ride. And to do that, you've got to adapt, because at the end of the day, you've got to show the value. Otherwise, I mean, what are we doing, right? The data is valuable, the product is valuable, then what we do needs to be valuable. And if that's the case, then we need to adapt so that we can continue to bring that value, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes good sense, and you bring some really great points, and I think some real use case to the idea as well. And it makes me really think, about this topic in general. personally, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but what you're doing for these companies as Brandon and our conversations over the years, I see this as, and it does exist, but becoming more and more of a position in companies, particularly larger companies, being this IT/OT bridge. And it's not just on the cybersecurity topic. I mean, that is a popular topic and it is a hot topic and it's something that needs to be looked at, but it's everything else you just mentioned. There is a difference between a field bus like the Ethernet IP you spoke about, or Modbus or Profinet or whatever it may be, even OPC UA, and then like data transportation protocols like an MQTT, like you mentioned, and one is more IT centric and one is more OT centric, and there's reasons for that. They have very different use cases, and it is. So
Well, and no different than being an effective communicator between the IT and OT. I can't tell you how many times I've implemented protocol converters, whether it be something off the shelf, custom code. I have this old press that runs some vendor software that's doing an HTTP post to their server. Let's get Ira Sharp. Let's reverse engineer that. I found the byte that has my data. Okay, now let's use some piece of software. Back in the day, in the beginning, I might have used Node-RED. Nowadays, I like to think I maybe got a little bit more refined. But write some custom code to accept that HTTP post, convert that over to MQTT, and now send that up to the cloud so that I have that. And being that protocol converter or conversationalist, let's say, it's really no different than being the IT/OT person that helps two of them. You need to help two people that don't speak the same language come to a common ground. And that's the same thing in IT/OT convergence. Is you have all these protocols, and to your point, you have IT ones and you have OT ones, but you rarely find people that understand Kafka and Profibus. That's a hard find, is to find someone who under the hood understands those two differences. This is what a protobuf is in Kafka, and this is what a data packet is in Profibus. So that's a huge need, and we're going to see that grow. But to your point about cybersecurity, that just creates more vectors, right? So we're introducing more software at an OT layer, probably, because we want to buffer that and do that protocol convergence before we see our first latency, like a firewall or whatever. That's adding a vector now. So now we need to engage with IT to understand, do you authorize this? And if not, how can we get this authorized, right? And another part of this is, your IT departments will focus a lot on network security or, more enterprise remote security, let's say. They're not really looking at the physical security of these systems. So I, as an attacker, see an open network port exposed. I don't even have to open a panel. Well, I've got tools in my bag. All I need to do is get in this building. And that's another part of this, that if IT doesn't consider the physical security, they're going to miss parts. And again, that's why I was kind of pushed that way. I had a mentor in grad school. She was a professor there. She's moved on to, I think she's at a community college now, but she was, a very big part of my success in grad school. And she worked in her career in pharmaceutical and security. And she kind of pushed me towards physical security as maybe more of a pillar to focus on, because it's not one people pay attention to when they go through. They see hackers and all they see is the person at the keyboard typing away and they get access. They don't see the person like me picking the lock, knocking the hinges off the door, coattail riding on somebody through a badged gate, or bumping into someone with a scanner and cloning their badge. And now I'm going into the building like I'm them. They don't think about, I'm not saying all of them don't, but a lot of them don't think about that. And on the OT layer, physical security is so much more important, because if you have a rogue agent with just a little bit of industrial knowledge and you haven't done your due diligence, you can have real world issues that are very, very serious.
yeah, and you bring up such great points, and so often these conversations go to, and it is critically important, what's actually happening on the or in the packets and in the switch, and are you defense in depth? But one of those defense in depth layers should definitely be physical security. One of the things that always comes to my mind, and where I started my career, I've been with Phoenix Contact for a very long time, 19 years, but I started off as the wireless product specialist, traveling around the country, dealing with all kinds of wireless applications. And one of the big ones I dealt with was water and oil and gas, particularly upstream. And in both of those applications, the reason wireless was involved is because of really remote assets. And then there was a lot of serial connection, so it wasn't maybe as accessible. But today, a lot of it's Ethernet, particularly with the advent of cellular. And you'll see private APNs for cellular communications, because that adds an element of security and more granularity over the network over a cellular connection. But there's nothing saying that you couldn't go to a remote location, open up that box, disconnect the PLC, or maybe there's an extra Ethernet port that's sitting there, and plug into that port, and now you're on the private APN, the private network, which was perceivably secure from all the outside internet-based attacks, but you're literally sitting on the local side of that at this point. And maybe there's other pieces in there, you're locking down the MAC addresses or whatever it is. But the point is, there was not a whole lot, even for those really remote locations, to your point, where there's nobody around. It's literally in the middle of woods somewhere. You could do whatever. Who knows what could happen?
And as an attacker, or as a defender, let's say, I would say, okay, let's put a door switch on the door. Somebody opens the door. I see the IO change states. I know my door just got opened. I don't have a service ticket. I raise I surface up an alarm that says a door at this station was opened without an active service ticket. Please respond. But then as an attacker, I start to say, maybe that's the mitigation that they did. Now let me go find like Lime SDR, and they sell a device that's a 2x2 MIMO that I can now make a rope femto cell, and I can get that device that speaks cellular to communicate with me, and then I'll talk to the cell network. And now I man in the middle of that device, and I can do what I want that way. And so that's the kind of building that you have to build on these systems to understand, like, what is the redundancy? And if the attacker doesn't take this, what is that next logical vector, right? And again, they might have thought of the cell side of this, the IT organization, but maybe they wouldn't have thought of a simple door switch. I mean, there's a PLC in that cabinet. It's just one more IO point. I should probably tell you about it. How much does the door switch cost versus how much does the security hack cost, right? But if you don't have someone on your OT side arguing for that up front and putting that cost in, well, then later it's going to cost so much more to send out a field technician to implement that switch later, when you realize I probably should have done that so that I could have had that granularity of understanding.
Right. And I do really believe that it is an evolution, right? It's not a revolution. Like, it is an iterative process, and things get more advanced over time and more sophisticated, and you can't think of everything all at once. But at the same time, it's the careful consideration up front, and not just trying to reject the other group's concerns 110%. Come together, have these conversations, and really come to common points where you're doing the best effort. Because that's the other thing too, is, Lord, we all know that it's not going to always be perfect, right? there are going to be gaps in whatever it is we do. So we just got to do our best to make it as defensible as possible, have a strategy, and then have monitoring in place so we can figure things out the best that we can. So I don't know if you agree with that. That's my personal point of view. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's right. But I think you also need to do and again, this comes from my mentor in grad school. She would always say, if it's not documented, it never happened. And so then I think it's on you to do the due diligence of, summarizing those disagreements, those suggestions, and saying, I understand that we're going to go this alternative way, but I think that this is the approach we should have taken. And then sending that so that you have a place to start with the postmortem. Because let's be real, if you decide not to do that, and we get down the road and we do have a security attack and questions are asked, well, if you don't have an email stating what was discussed, what was the outcome of that discussion, and document it, then people may ask, well, why didn't you recommend this? So I think that that's a part of this is being flexible and understanding that you may have to do this a way you don't agree with. But again, being flexible and going the path that's decided, I think that that's sometimes a hurdle for people is just saying, I don't need to win every battle, but I do need to win the war, so to speak. It's kind of a blunt mindset, but getting people to believe that, to understand that we don't always have to go your way, and you're welcome to document your disagreements, but we've got to go the way that the organization wants to go, and being flexible, being proactive, but also being, again, well documented is key to succeeding in that environment.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So it also makes me think, just as a little tongue in cheek, of the question of if a tree falls in the wood doesn't make a sound. I think your answer would be only if it's documented. So no, I'm just joking.
No, I mean, yeah, probably it is kind of, but again, when we're talking about IT/OT convergence, we have to be honest about the implications if we get that wrong. And if you get it wrong, things happen. Liability is a real thing, and so making sure that everything is documented so that we can do the proper postmortem and avoid this issue again. It's key to succeeding, in my opinion.
It really is, and I think it adds more transparency ongoing, and then the systems and processes can build on themselves to just become more and more robust over time. So it makes a lot of sense. Well, Brandon, we've had a good conversation here. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to touch on while we were talking?
No, I think that this is a topic that's great. I think, to your point earlier, a lot of organizations are starting to identify this as a need and starting to really put in time and effort to build up the verticals needed to support this kind of effort. Really, my advice to students and people who are looking at this industry, it really just takes a willingness to learn. I didn't know half this stuff. Look, when I was a bartender, if you would have asked me what a Kafka, protobuf is, I would have said, I have no clue. Now I do. So it takes a willingness to learn, but it also takes an effort to continue learning. Kafka is not something I knew about 5 years ago in full visibility, but as I've grown in this industry, I realize it's something I had to understand. I had to be able to use. And that's just one example of a continuous learning. And that's really my advice to people is, you know, I really, didn't start doing this until I think I was 30. I was in my mid 20s when I went to school. And so I'm not some expert that has 20 years of experience. I've been here, a little less than a decade, and it really just took a passion to want to learn. Reading articles, understanding new frameworks, new topologies, new ideas. And again, like we said in the beginning of this call, breaking out of my comfort zone and getting into things that I really didn't love. C or C++ going through school wasn't my favorite. Yeah, I could, finish the labs and things, but computer programming really wasn't like my favorite thing. I was more interested in the electronics and the things like that. I've made my career now on more of the programming side and a lot less on the circuitry. And again, I got that through continual learning by being assigned programming tasks and saying, okay, well, I've got to meet this task. And again, it's just that continual learning. That's what I would say to people is if you want to be in this industry and be successful, you have to put in the time and not just once. It's got to be a continuous kind of thing, and you've got to make it fun or otherwise you're just going to burn out.
I think that's really, really good advice. I mean, so find something fun, challenge yourself to think outside of the box, and just being a continuous learner and evolve. Those are the things that I heard you say, and I think that's such a great message. I mean, are there any particular resources or types of things that you would recommend that people specifically look at to learn and train on these topics, or is it just more general? Is there something specific, I guess?
Google and YouTube.
Google and YouTube.
As funny as it sounds, I probably attribute most of my success in my career to Google. I'm not an expert. There's a methodology in Google called dorking. Are you familiar with that?
I am not.
It's again, in cybersecurity, you learn how to do OSINT, open source intelligence gathering. And so Google dorking is a way to use syntax to get really specific results back, not just your general what the algorithm thinks you want to see, very deep in the weeds of you controlling, I want these topics, not these topics, and building, somewhat compound queries into your Google. It helps you pull out these very deep in the weeds PDFs. So you could say, give me all files where PDF, right? So now, if it's a PDF, I'm obviously, again, going to want to make sure it came from a reputable source and it's not malware. But, for Siemens, if I put it in and now I have a Siemens PDF that gives me all of this information on how this one function works. Okay, I can read that. I can understand that. But that's been my career, and I see the memes. I'm sure you've seen the memes where it's like junior developer, and the Google thing says like, how do I index an array? And then it says like senior developer, or like staff developer, and it's how do I index an array? It's real. I mean, you don't learn all that syntax and just keep it up there forever. You learn the core concepts, and then you just get really good at like learning information. That's what college is. It's you don't college doesn't really teach you anything other than how to learn new information. And so yeah, open source intelligence through Google and YouTube, probably 70% of what I know. Other than that, very specific textbooks. But again, you can Google, you can go on various college websites, go to their administrative or their bookstore, right? You could go to my alma mater, go to their bookstore and see what books they're assigning for various classes. Well, if you want to get really deep into the weeds, you now know what book they were going to assign that's, outward facing. Buy the book on Amazon. My advice, wait to the end of a semester. It's supply and demand. At the beginning of a semester, prices are going to be through the roof because supply is low. The end of a semester, you go on Amazon, you will find books for 10% of what they normally cost at the beginning of a semester because everyone wants to sell their books. They don't care. They don't want to hold on to it. And that's my advice is, buy books, use Google and YouTube to understand the general things. And then if you want to get into specifics, again, wait towards the end of the semester, buy books on specific topics, and then just reference them.
Some really, really great advice. So, Brandon, awesome conversation. Great to have you on. I think we've learned a lot and just really appreciate your insights. I think it was a different look than I've typically had on this podcast and other platforms I've been on. And it's always great to have a solid conversation with you. So thank you so much for your time. And for everybody else out there, thank you for joining us today on Tomorrow's Trends and hope you have a wonderful and pleasant day.